What's up, world? This is Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today, a podcast where we discuss with entrepreneurs what it means to achieve success, grow a company, try to change the world, and accomplish your vision. Last episode, we talked with James Murray. He's a partner and managing director at Excite Ventures. And once again, we're here with another entrepreneur, Cory Bergh. He is from America's neighbor, Canada. We have some great topics we're going to cover today, and I'm really excited. Cory, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
So, Cory, you're the co-founder and CEO of Crbon Labs. You're a leader in energy innovation and carbon credits, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. Let's do it. This is Ambition Today. Cory, welcome to the show. Excited to have you here today. Where are you calling from? What are you up to? Where are you?
I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Beautiful day here, probably 15 degrees Celsius.
All right. Well, we'll let the listeners convert it to Fahrenheit. Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about your origin story. We're going to talk a lot about carbon credits, climate tech, and what you're doing now with Crbon Labs. But where did it start? Were you exposed to entrepreneurship when you were young? How did the bug bite you?
Well, when I was in my university years, I wrote my master's thesis on entrepreneurship, and that was quite a long time ago, 1993. So ages ago. But at the time when I was studying entrepreneurship, I did not consider myself to be an entrepreneur. I was looking at the characteristics that make a successful startup or a successful small business. And I published my thesis, wrote a few papers, and then I ended up working in a corporate job and just spent 27 years in corporate jobs.
We've talked about this a little bit before, and I guess we should tell the audience that we know each other. We've been talking for a bit, bring me through those corporate jobs, right? Because I think they segue nicely into your origin story of Crbon Labs. What did you do? What were you working on?
Well, straight out of my master's program, I was actually a lecturer at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan, where I grew up. I spent a year on faculty there, trying to decide whether I'd do my PhD or go into business or go into the corporate world somehow. And I decided to go in the corporate world, and I never really went back to that academic part of my career. But then I took a job as an analyst at an insurance company in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is the capital city of Saskatchewan. And I spent a few years there with my wife, and ended up moving to Calgary in 2000. We had no kids at the time, and we just picked up and moved out here. Got a job with a venture capital company called LaunchWorks here in the city, and spent a few years with them until about mid 2000s.
Were you doing investments?
I was the valuations analyst for them, so I calculated the value of all of their venture investments, and it's funny.
Maybe for those listening, because me and you have talked about it a lot. Can you just give a quick lay of the land of maybe how venture capital in Canada differs compared to the United States, and predominantly just because of what is up there, right? Which is a lot of oil, a lot of resources, a lot of mining. How do those two landscapes compare, and how do they contrast?
Well, venture capital and just generally, let's call it startup investing in Canada may be very different than the United States, at least from what I can tell. Specifically in Calgary, it's oriented around energy. 70% of employment in Alberta is somehow connected or dependent on the energy industry. And so you have entire ecosystems of organizations that are both right from the exploration and drilling and development of energy sources of fossil fuels, all the way through to the service companies, to the technology companies that serve the oil and gas industry, and that is your primary ecosystem here. So when you are starting up a company in some other adjacent industry, there is a very thin amount of capital available. Most capital has traditionally been focused on how can we take advantage of this industry that is spinning off new startups, spinning off new technology, trying to help the oil and gas industry produce fossil fuels more efficiently.
Gotcha. Okay, so then this takes you to NAL Resources.
Yeah, so then I moved. I moved to Calgary, and I worked for this venture capital company. And then, actually, I made a pit stop as a real estate analyst for a real estate developer here. I spent a year there, and then I joined NAL Resources in 2007. I actually ran into my boss, my supervisor, that was my longtime supervisor, who actually hired me at LaunchWorks at the venture capital company to be his valuations analyst. I ran into him in Calgary, and he was back here. He had just taken up CFO position at NAL Resources, and he needed someone in his analyst group there. So I became his manager of FP&A at the oil company. And this particular oil company was, at the time, it would range anywhere from 25,000 barrels a day to about 50,000 barrels a day.
Nice. So how does this then sort of segue into Carbon Labs? So this exposes you to carbon emissions through NAL, and then that creates the opportunity for Carbon Labs. How do those?
Yeah, at first, with the first from 2007 to about 2015, it had I was in the organization, moving up from manager FP&A to vice president of financial services inside the organization. Ended up having 9 different departments reporting to me. I reported to Keith, my co-founder, the CFO, and we were heavily focused on efficiency in the admin side of the organization. And but then in 2015, something significant happened. Was the lower for longer oil prices hit. And this is when shale oil came in and drove the price of oil down dramatically.
Lower for longer?
Yeah, so you went from 2008 peak oil, which was a concept in the energy industry, to 2015 lower for longer, as in like there's more oil than we need in the marketplace, and it'll be lower for longer, as in lower for longer, lower forever is what we used to say. And that meant the organization really had to become efficient.
Is that because fracking became a thing, so it just increased the supply, or what caused
shale oil fracking in the northeastern United States? Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And of course, in other major basins as well. And so ultimately, you had a lot of very inexpensive flush production, driving oil price down. The curves flattened out and even became backwardated. And from an oil and gas company perspective, that impact their valuations, that impact their cash flow and ability to function as they had normally functioned in the past, which was you have a contango curve. You invest your capital in exploration and drilling and development, and that drives your future valuation. Lower for longer, you don't have that.
Gotcha. Okay, so all right, you've got a decade, 2 decades in the industry, right? Energy, carbon. Maybe before we go into Carbon Labs, if you could, what is this industry, right? So what happens? People lower for longer. They drill a well. Like, what is a well? What does that look like for someone listening who has no idea? 1,000-foot view. What does this look like?
Sure.
And then what did you see that let you create Carbon Labs?
All right. Well, so after 2015, became responsible for our efficiency strategy at the company, as well as our carbon footprint strategy, and that was essentially the catalyst to me learning all about, I'll call it the legacy of the oil and gas industry, and how it was going to have to change. And in many ways it has changed. In many ways it's still the same today. That was going to, essentially drive me towards eventually starting Carbon Labs. So in the oil and gas industry, a well is drilled. And if you don't know this, but it initially if it comes on, it'll come on with a significant amount of production if it's successful. and that production will drop off rapidly, especially with horizontal drilling and fracking.
So a drop off is a week later, 2 years later, 20 years later. What is the lifetime? What is the life cycle of a well?
Within a year of drilling a well that is a horizontal drill and a multi-stage frac, you may drop off by up to 60%. And 2 years later, you're down to 20% of what you originally were producing. And eventually that then declines over the next, let's call it 10 to 15 years, depending on how the oil and gas company can stimulate that well to keep on producing economically.
Wow, that's really fast.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
So basically, in the oil industry, you get all of your cash after you drill the well within 2 years. So you spend all this money to drill a well, and you get it all back within 2 years. And the tail of that production ultimately results in your net cash flow over time. So the industry in general is incentivized to drill more wells because of that flush cash flow. And they are incentivized to extend the life of wells as long as possible. So
Okay.
that's their business.
So what happens at the end of a well's life cycle? And enter Crbon Labs.
Typically, end of the well life cycle is the economics of plugging and abandoning a well do not make sense to an oil and gas company in real time. So you spent all this money to drill, you spend all this money to produce, and now you need to spend all your money to drill and produce. You do not have a lot of capital to plug and abandon. And so that is generally considered dead capital in the oil and gas industry. If you overspend your dead capital, you underperform in your quarterly performance or your annual performance.
So could you just unpack the words, because you said them a few times, plug and abandon?
Plug and abandon is downhole plugging the well in all of the zones of production that you have entered. So you essentially are drilling a well that's literally several miles deep and maybe even several miles horizontally in one or multiple directions from that well site, or that well pad. So that means you have physically punctured a reservoir of high pressured hydrocarbons. And now, as an owner of that well or a responsible operator of that well, if you intend to stop producing it for a long period of time or forever, you now at some point have to go downhole and inject cement into all of those areas where the hydrocarbons can come out through the wellbore, and that's downhole abandonment or downhole plugging in the United States, and then there's abandonment in Canada means service abandonment. So you've downhole plugged and cemented, cut and capped that well, meaning you welded on something on top. It's fully cemented, not leaking. And then you essentially remove all of the surface equipment, all of the connecting pipelines or connecting equipment, and you remediate the soil and reclaim the site eventually to its original state. So that's plug and abandon in a nutshell.
Okay, and so the economics, the business model sort of dictates that people then just kind of go drill the next well, and most times, wells do not get plugged and abandoned, and they leak methane, they leak stuff, and this is where Crbon Labs comes in. All right, so we've got a pretty good understanding of what's happening here, I think. Enter Crbon Labs, right? And maybe what we'll do as we talk about Crbon Labs is talk about the three phases of it, which to the best of my understanding is plugging the platform to help identify and where you can have the biggest impact, and then how you sell them as well. Shopify,
Sure.
AI data centers, all that stuff. So what is Crbon Labs? Give us the intro.
Well, Crbon Labs is a complementary organization to the oil and gas industry in the sense that the business model of oil and gas, as I explained it, does not drive capital to plug and abandon. So there has to be another incentive for that. And that incentive is to give a quantification of some benefit that's created by the identification of a well, the deployment of capital to plug and abandon it, and then obviously the ability to sell that quantification of that value to someone else who finds that valuable. And the reason why we all should consider this a valuable activity is that if the oil and gas industries are highly incentivized to produce the next barrel, which they are doing because we demand it. When we charge our phones, when we stand and gas up at the pump, we are demanding the next barrel as consumers. We may not know that it's a commodity that is being sold, and our payment at the pump, regardless of how much tax is paid to the government for those activities of or the privilege of pumping our gas or are getting our electricity, it does not find its way back to the industry to fund plug-in abandonment. So in our case, if you can have a methodology that says there's a value here that we should all be paying attention to and that we're all responsible for, there is now a new business case that says that a company like Crbon Labs can identify wells, measure and quantify the environmental benefit of the early plug-in abandonment, in this case a carbon credit, and then sell that to a buyer that finds that environmental attribute to be consistent with their values. That is ultimately a net benefit to everybody in a particular jurisdiction, whether it's the industry of energy itself, it's the regulatory bodies, or it's the landowners, or even just the general residents in these areas. Everyone all benefits from the business that Crbon Labs conducts.
Got it. Okay. A lot of industry jargon there, so I'm gonna push back a bit. So essentially, you guys are plugging the wells. You're being incentivized to do that because it creates carbon credits that you can then use your platform, Crbon Labs, to identify the most profitable wells to generate the credits, and then also the best places to sell the credits. And,
that's right.
Is that fair?
That's right. In fact, so when we first started, the identification of a well was a bit of a random walk. You had to have connections within the industry. You found wells by talking to field operators, talking to the Orphan Well Association, and essentially trying to figure out which well is the easiest one that you can get access to as quickly as possible to try to prove out your business model. That's what we did with our very first well, which was essentially abandoned in around say fourth quarter 2024. The better way to do this is using software and data. So we built an application called CarbonScope that essentially takes the quantification methodologies of the voluntary carbon credit registries that exist out there, and we converted those into algorithms. We download or we tied into the data streams from Alberta Energy Regulator, and we are able to apply those algorithms across every well in Alberta and identify well projects, with data, rather than having to just randomly walk around and talk to people. And that is the most efficient way to find projects.
Well, I think what's also interesting, and what I love about what you do, is like you're bridging the gap between, because sometimes these are different companies, right? And so by you being end to end, you're verifying the validity of the methane you're removing, i.e. directly stamping the carbon credit. Because we've talked a lot about this, like sometimes the carbon credit industry catches shit because, okay, you're going to create carbon credits and not cut down the trees in this, 500 square miles, and you create those credits. But then they just go down the road and cut down the trees over there, and they still get the wood, and they get the carbon credits. They double dip, and so the carbon credit industry, I think, has had to do a lot of work to legitimize itself. And what you're doing really does that. You're validating, like, this is happening, they're being abandoned, we're plugging it, we're measuring the methane, we're creating a set amount of carbon credits, and we're doing that really intelligently thanks to CarbonScope and the platform you guys built. Yeah.
That's right. I'll say, generally speaking, the amount of nature in the world is consistent with the amount of overall emissions that the Earth generally emits. And humans are the natural cause of most excess emissions. And so now, not that being said, is protection of nature is extremely important. Anybody who's conducting a nature-based or any type of carbon project in general is doing all the right things. We just also need to focus on the industrial side of the solution, which is if we are the industrial cause of excess emissions, the solution should be tied naturally to the industrial remediation of those solutions. And that's where Crbon Labs is really focusing. The wells that we look at, they are definitively there and they're plugged and abandoned, and they're definitively not there after, and they will never produce again, and they'll generally never leak again. And that is a very important, I'd say, quality factor to what we are trying to achieve.
How many wells are there that need to be plugged? Yeah, let's do US and Canada, North America. Let's do it.
In North America, there are 4 million wells. Of those wells, about 1 million of them are producing. And of those million wells that are producing,
wells that are not producing.
3 million wells are not producing or are considered orphaned. Absolutely. But let's first look at, I think it's really important people to understand is of the million wells that are producing, 75% of them produce less than 10 barrels a day. So they're generally
they're in that tail phase.
They're called marginal wells. So remember when I told you about the well produces and you get your money back and then you drill another well? The wells that are left there to produce after that produce relatively low quantities for a fairly long period of time. Eventually, those wells become inactive, and like I said, there are good reasons for inactive wells, and there are in that neighborhood of 3 million inactive and orphan wells. I'd say somewhere around 300,000 or 400,000 orphan wells are notionally believed to exist in North America. Primarily, they don't have a good number for that because they do not have good records in many jurisdictions for the wells drilled a long time ago.
Of the 3 million inactive wells, what percentage of that is plugged?
I don't think that there's a good data on all of that. Generally speaking, in Alberta, I can tell you that of the inactive wells, so there's like about 450,000 wells, 150,000 of them are producing, and there's about 300,000 wells that are in Alberta that are either in some stage of inactive and plugged all the way through to full reclamation. So I'd say probably half of those wells are actually some form of some attempt at plugging has been done in the past.
Okay.
And the other half they're essentially unplugged.
So even extrapolating that out and saying it's 50%, there's still 1.5 million wells that need plugging in North America, and yeah, the opportunity is massive. Okay, we're going to take a break here in a minute, but before we do, I want to ask one last question about Crbon Labs. So you guys plug the wells, you create the carbon credits, you have the platform CarbonScope to identify the best wells for the profitability on the carbon credits, and also validating the maximum methane emissions are reduced. You talked about the last bit of the platform, so you guys also then can help sell the credits, and you have a few different ways to do that, and you've kind of been innovating in this space. So can you talk a little bit about what you've built there?
Sure. So traditionally in the carbon credit industry, a lot of organizations sell to other platforms or other channels, B2B, direct bilateral sales directly to sustainability buyers is one. So maybe like to a Fortune 500 company, for example, or through a reseller as a channel partner, or through a brokerage as a channel partner. That is probably your largest, natural channel that you go to when you start creating credits. And we made our first sale to our channel partner in the United States, US Energy, subsidiary of US Venture in Wisconsin. We did that in April 2025, and they bought the entire first project that we made from our flagship orphan well project in Canada. And ultimately, you're selling in bulk in that case. So you're selling it to someone else who is going to sell it to other people, and they're trying to, make a profit off of that. And so you wind up with a bulk sale. In our journey, we started in the middle of last year saying, where can we actually make a bigger impact for the company by having more connection to the real driver of emissions, which ultimately is the consumer. Every single transaction that we undertake drives emissions, and we are probably and most likely not paying for the emission that we are creating. It's an unfunded liability that we as consumers are creating with our consumption. And I really wanted to try to find a way to get right to the source of emissions. So we started looking at a segment of the carbon industry called carbon smart e-commerce middle of last year, and we decided to start innovating in that space by building our own pathway to that market. And our first product came out in sort of late 2025. We called it Carbon Free for Shopify, and that was our first foray into this particular part of the market. And in that context,
It's essentially like a Shopify. I can add, if I'm a Shopify store owner, I can add this to my store, and anytime one of my customers makes a purchase, there's an estimate around the carbon created for that delivery, and it offsets that, right?
that's correct. Yeah, it's essentially you have the option as a shopper. You'll be given the option as a shopper if the merchant has downloaded our app to know the quantity of emissions that your cart is responsible for, and we do this through a connection to artificial intelligence that actually makes this direct estimate fully documented by the AI. And then you have an opportunity to pay a small fee to offset that, and ultimately that drives not only a carbon-free purchase, but also cash flow back to Crbon Labs that allows us to do more projects and make more of a
and you're getting a legitimate carbon credit because it's tied back to the very wells that you've been plugging
That's
in.
right.
And so,
Exactly. We have all of the proof of all of our projects because we run them end to end.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the latest version that I've been using of
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, since the beginning of the year, we have been going like mad to try to find more platforms we could work with and more opportunities to essentially bundle a specific activity that has a specific carbon footprint with a specific offset in a transaction. After we launched Carbon Free for Shopify, we immediately started working on Carbon Free for Stripe, which is now live in the Stripe app marketplace for payments. We have applied our first app into the OpenAI ChatGPT agentic shopping environment that's coming through their app store, and we're waiting to get approval there. But I think the thing that we kind of ended up with is, and this is from chatting with you, Kevin, is that we realized that there was a significant opportunity with the way that AI is accounting for its energy usage or its token usage, that allowed us to specifically identify the carbon impact of a million tokens, for example, in an AI heavy platform.
Yeah.
And we built Carbon Free for offsetting AI heavy workloads. And right now we're just in private beta with that to get some feedback from the market. So
yeah, and what I love about this for those listening is so basically, we have Aurora built inside Finta. It's our own AI. It runs the OpenAI models, it runs Claude, it runs Gemini, and with Carbon Free, I'm able to essentially just hook Finta up, pass our token usage for the whole platform on like a monthly basis, and then pay to offset our carbon, essentially. And I know that I'm getting legitimate credits through Crbon Labs and the wells you guys have plugged, and so it's very cool. And I'm excited to be beta testing it, and I can't wait for other people to try it as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Cory Bergh of Crbon Labs. This episode of Ambition Today is brought to you by Finta. Finta is your capital co-pilot. You can simply go to trustfinta.com and sign up today, upload your pitch deck, and our AI Aurora will automatically start finding investors and adding them to your CRM, deep researching them, personalizing to your deal, helping you draft emails to push people forward in the funnel. Get started today for free at trustfinta.com. And now back to this episode of Ambition Today. All right, welcome back. We are here with Cory Bergh. We've been talking about his company, Crbon Labs, which is really unique, plugging and abandoning wells, identifying the places that it can have the biggest impact to reduce emissions and better the environment, and then allowing consumers and making it easy for them to access those credits to offset their own emissions, whether it's buying something in Shopify or processing payments through Stripe or monitoring our AI usage, which is skyrocketing for every platform out there. So, Cory, I love what you're doing with Crbon Labs. You have a unique insight into the climate tech environment, the industry. And so I want to take a minute to ask you a bit about news, what's going on in the market. Ready to go?
Sure.
All right. I love that you were just featured on Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is that?
Yeah, so we had a short documentary produced by a program called Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid, and it's out right now. Basically, it essentially is an educational program that tries to bring important social issues to the forefront, and we're really grateful to have been featured on this short segment that was produced by this organization, and essentially just says, hey, there's a lot of wells out there. There's a lot of leaking wells out there. And there are organizations like Crbon Labs in Canada and elsewhere in North America that are trying to address this problem. And so we're really
watching it. I watched it last night. It's short. It's 10 minutes. And, we've been talking for a long time. What I think that video did for me is just the sheer scope. We've talked about like the number of wells, but you see in the video, like how close they are to one another. And just the sheer volume of how many there are, it's crazy to see.
Yeah, I mean that's something that as consumers, as just everyday citizens, we don't necessarily realize what we're causing to have happen with our energy. Is that we, as I mentioned earlier, we demand it, we need it,
we have it. Turn on the furnace.
Yeah. And so the energy industry really seizes on that, and that's their product market fit, right? Is that says the only thing that matters is drilling the next well, because if they don't deliver the next barrel, you have energy insecurity, and that's a problem.
So you have a unique insight into this industry, at the oil, gas, resources, shale, mining level. You also are building a tech company, right? What do you like? What's the state of climate tech as an industry, from a venture capital, software, technology perspective, and maybe where does that intersect with?
So I would say when people think about climate tech, they often think about some gadget that can be invented that will just be attached to a well that will just miraculously eliminate its emissions, or a gadget that will just miraculously change how we consume energy and ultimately drive us towards a different, cleaner source. And
it's often super broad, right? Like you hear about people scrubbing carbon out of the air. I invested in a company called Living Carbon that makes trees that absorb more carbon than normal trees. So we're storing like there's so many angles of approach in climate tech. It's crazy. And carbon's just a small segment of it, essentially.
Well, I would say generally speaking, all of that climate tech has a very small impact, and I'm saying that anecdotally. I don't have a specific number, but it generally has a very small impact. And I can give you an example. When I was vice president of technology innovation at NAL, and I was responsible for carbon footprint reduction, we sponsored a study to find any technology around the world that we could apply in our business to automatically and significantly reduce our emissions and allow us to continue to conduct our business in the same way that we were doing it. And I think that the thing that I can tell you there is this particular organization that studied it for us found 36 or 37 technologies around the world, of which 0 were economic to apply in an oil and gas industry scenario. So there is a lot of technology out there. It's just not economic to apply to the problem today. And what so Brian Spiegelman, our chief operating officer, he worked with me at NAL on this problem when I worked there, and he said to me one day, he said, Cory, methane is leaking out of every possible like point you can imagine on a well, but it's not enough to light your barbecue. It's in most cases it's just coming out of everywhere. If you went to a well site, you would almost certainly detect methane, and and ultimately, from an economics perspective, there's just nothing you can do about it. So that's the issue that I have with call it climate tech, is that it's either very very far into the future, it's incredibly expensive, it's currently not economic today, and you sit here and you say, well, what are you going to do about it today? And so that's why we founded Crbon Labs, is because we felt like there was a solution that you could do today, and it's called climate impact. It's related to technology. It uses technology. In our case, we're building some software to bring our climate impact to market. But the actual activity is just getting out there and doing it, and it just has to be economic for you to actually conduct that work. So
yeah, and it's actually like business model innovation being enabled and empowered by the technology change. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So I think that maybe most people do not necessarily realize that when a new gadget is created, the most likely scenario is that it probably works. It's just not economic to deploy today in the current environment. So you either have to have much, much higher energy prices driving you to some other solution that now becomes economic, or you have to have natural incentives, whether it's maybe it's coming from the government, or it's coming from just people that are deciding to switch on their own. There's all sorts of reasons why people would choose a different method, but it tends to come at a higher price than the current source of energy they have today.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's one more trend I want to talk about, because I know you've been playing around with it. OpenClaw. So I know that you've been playing around with it. I honestly just want to get your thoughts as someone who's spent some time with it. I think my thesis, I set it up. It was a pain to set up. I struggled with it, to be candid. And then you've got Perplexity launched computer. Manus launched something this week. Claude has co-work. I think, OpenAI released Codex that has skills and automations and scheduling built into it. But yeah, someone like who's played with OpenClaw, maybe you could take a minute or two and unpack for people. What is it? Is it hype? Where does the rubber meet the road? Where is it valuable? Yeah.
All right. Well, so I heard about this OpenClaw thing a couple months ago. I followed it through on Twitter, and then I just decided one day I'm going to go buy myself a little Mac Mini, not even like the fancy ones, just like the basic Mac Mini. And I'm going to ask my dev team to set it up for us to see if it could potentially become valuable to us. And from a perspective of it, could it actually be a software engineer, just as an extra additional employee? And so we set it up, and we've been playing with it now for about a month. I would say, generally speaking, if you're following the conversation on X, there's a lot of hype inside of there that says it can do a lot of things. I would say, generally speaking, it needs a lot of support. It needs a lot of guidance. It probably should not be released as an autonomous addition to your life at this point in time. We have kept it very contained. It has specific roles. It has we call ours Yoda. Yoda has specific roles. It has specific responsibilities, and only acts at this point when we ask it to, because here's why. When we learned the very first time we tried it, we were on a call together. We said, hey, let's try it out. Let's ask it to build something for us. Well, it took about 20 minutes to write the prompt between the three of us on the call. In 5 minutes, it had written 8,000 lines of code, and all of a sudden, everyone was like, "Whoa! Now it's going to take us."
We now have to read 8,000 lines of code.
Yes, exactly. So at that point, we said, "Okay, we'll contain this thing completely, because we cannot trust it to necessarily do the right thing. It doesn't necessarily understand what we're trying to achieve. Yoda is very positive and very enjoyable to chat with, but doesn't necessarily know exactly what we want. But
Yeah.
I'm really bullish on it, because here's what I'll say is, like, from the way that I've been using it is, I had my dev team set it up so that I could adjust and change our landing page by myself, with the help of Yoda, and not involve them in things like, oh, I want to change this word, or I want to change this paragraph, or, so yesterday, an example, I added another, team member to our, our team on our website. I had neglected to do that because it seemed like it was not as valuable, in the sense that I would rather have my dev team writing other types of code. So I just asked Yoda. I said, "Hey, I want to add this member," and Yoda says, "Okay, well, give me the photograph, the bio, the everything." And over a course of about 4 or 5 iterative prompts, successfully created a new member of my team and a pull request that I sent to my dev team last night before I left work, and it saved them probably 30 minutes of frustration, and I was able to do it myself.
Nice. Well, awesome.
Yeah. So
would you recommend at this stage people still play around with it? Do you think it's worth having set up because the benefit over the next 12 months, or wait for the like? Where are you at with it?
I would say it's always better, in my opinion, to experiment early and be prepared for what's going to happen in the future than to catch up later. And this goes back to, well, when you work in the oil and gas industry.
My takeaway from the open cloud thing is actually less to do with what it can do. My takeaway is we're going to have agents running 24/7.
I think that's the exact truth.
They're going to be creating carbon 24/7. So what you built with the AI offset is brilliant.
Yeah. I read an article recently called Gas-Fired Intelligence. It's on A16Z's blog. It was written by a fellow here in Calgary. I don't know that person, but what it basically said was, for the first time, I've read an article that connected directly the drivers of AI in the way that it's growing with the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels. So, the question that I would say in this case that people need to ask themselves is, if inference is gas fired, then should not carbon emission reductions be directly connected to what's actually being, developed in the energy space around that? And so that's something that's kind of inspired me. I think about it almost every day. And going back to the open claw thing, is that's what we realized is, holy cow, this is the beginning of an autonomous agent revolution. It may not be as good today as, in fact, today is the worst it will ever be. In the future, it will be so, I think, so natural to us to work with agents that they will make purchases for us.
Yeah.
And that was something that actually, if you haven't seen it, just yesterday, Stripe came out with its autonomous agent payment application, essentially making it possible for an agent to make a purchase entirely on its own without the help of a human.
Yeah.
This is the beginning of agents driving huge amounts of emissions, doing things faster, more efficiently for us. But at the same time, we're going to be giving them the rights to our credit cards, to our bank accounts, and they'll be trusted someday to make purchases for us. And in this case, we would like those agents to be able to recognize their own emission footprint and also make decisions to offset their own footprint, should that be something that their owners desire. So we're working towards that with our AI workloads app.
All right, I got one more question for you. As we come to a close here. So this is a question we ask everybody that we have on the podcast, founders, investors, everyone. What is the single greatest piece of advice you've learned in your lifetime? And tell us the story of how you learned it.
Okay, so when I worked at at LaunchWorks, I worked with the founder of that. His name is Byron Osing. He was a top 40 under 40 in Canada. a young tech entrepreneur in late 1990s and into the early 2000s. And one day when I was sitting across from Byron in the open office that we had at that time, I was listening to him. He was on the phone constantly, and I was listening to him, and he got off the phone. He said, "Cory, make sure you go down as many paths as you can at the same time, because you never know which one is going to pay off." And I'd say that's probably one of the pieces of advice that I think about most frequently in the way that we're doing the company today. Like, a lot of times people will say, "Wow, Cory, you have a lot going on. You're doing carbon credits, and you have complicated well plug and abandonments. You're working with oil and gas producers and on projects and validator verifiers, and you're trying to market your credits to Fortune 500 companies, and then you're trying to build software on top of that." And I think the reason that I'm doing all of that is because I want to give the organization the highest percentage probability of success, and I don't want to leave any stone unturned. And there is a case to be made for focus, but because the world is moving so quickly today, I cannot be 100% certain what will pay off. I'm making the choice to drive us as hard and as fast down as many paths as we can.
Nice. Well, I love that. I think it's chasing curiosity, right? And it's learning. It's honestly like forcing yourself through education, and by being as close to the cutting edge and living a bit in the future, that's what unlocks the ability for building product and technology sort of at the forefront there. Well, Cory, thanks for coming on the pod. I think this was great. I'm really excited for what you guys are building. Where can people go check out more about Crbon Labs, Carbon Free? Where do you want to send the list?
Well, if you go to carbonlabs.com, you can get to our carbon free landing pages from there. If you go just to the products drop down. If you want to learn more, you can go to Viewpoint with Dennis Quaid. And also we'll post that link now on our website to be able to see that. Any recent information about there will be on the website. And if you'd like to contact me, Cory.Bergh@carbonlabs.com.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on the pod, Cory. The show notes, which include everything from this episode, including links to what we talked about, will be up on my website, sisgar.com, and we will see you next time on Ambition Today.